family owns a beautiful cabin in Oakley, Utah. The sound of the river, the horses that are down in the pasture, the birds, it's absolutely heaven on earth to me. My mom had given it a name, Tita's Tranquility, because of the serenity and peace.
The cabin was an awesome place to go to. As a young child, I loved going up there, bringing aunts and uncles and cousins. The cabin was about 2.5 miles off the road. You have to snowmobile in during the wintertime. It was an escape from the world for our family. It was winter of 1990.
I was 20 years old and my little sister was 16.
It was Christmas time. We were off for the holidays. There's a large Christmas tree with lots of gifts around it.
I have great memories of spending Christmas with my mom and dad. My mom even had our Christmas stockings hung under the fireplace mantel, ready for Santa to come. 3 days before Christmas, our family had to finish up our Christmas shopping and head back up to our family cabin. My mom and Grams and I arrived at the cabin first, and my hands were freezing. It was a bitter cold winter that year. I asked my mom to hurry and unlock the door. I needed to run in and run my hands under some water, and I would be right back down to help her. I got to the top of the stairs and saw a gray flash go behind the refrigerator. And the first thought that popped in my mind was, oh, a cousin's here already, and was going to jump out and say boo. It didn't turn out that way. Behind the refrigerator came a frizzy-headed man in a gray sweatshirt with his pistol pointed at me. I assumed that he would want to just rob us and be on his way. As soon as my mom came to the top of the stairs out from the back bedroom, another robber with thick Coke bottle glasses on was pointing a gun at my mother. My mom was saying to him, "What is it you want? Why are you here? I'll give you anything." Seconds after she had said that, gunfire started imploding, exploding, explosion from everywhere. I saw my mom go down. I turned at that point and looked over my shoulder to my Grams and saw her get shot in the head and blood spray everywhere. I heard her gasp for some breath, and then it was just dead silence. I felt pretty certain that they were dead. My thoughts were turned to knowing that within minutes, my dad and sister would be coming. I can remember hearing snowmobiles coming in the distance and my heart sinking to my gut, knowing that that was my dad and sister. It felt like slow motion and quick all at once. I can remember the screams and Grams falling off the stool and my mom reaching over her chest saying, "I've been shot." I started to plan ahead. I knew that there was a car. I knew my dad left the car keys underneath the mat. If I got these men out of the cabin and into the car, my dad and my sister would be safe. As the noises of the snowmobiles became closer, the man in the gray sweatshirt grabbed me from behind around the neck, put his gun to my back.
Dad and I arrived at the cabin, and as soon as we got off the snowmobiles, a man jumped out from the garage with a full ski mask on and a gun and demanded that we come inside right away. "Don't move, don't move. Don't move, don't do anything."
My dad could see tears in my eyes, and it was an unspoken communication, and he knew at that point that something awful had happened to Mom and Grams. The man asked my dad if he had any money. He reached into his pockets and pulled out what he had and threw it down to the ground. The man in the Coke bottle glasses was instructed by the other to shoot my dad. He pulled back the hammer, I heard it, and he refused to fire.
So then the other man restraining my sister pulled his gun out, pointed it at my dad, pulled the trigger once, click, no fire, twice, click, no fire. And then the third one when it off, that blast was so close I could feel it.
I had no doubt in my mind that he was dead, just like Mom and Gramps. I was terrified to just think that the trauma would not stop. It kept going. Didn't make any sense to me. I had no idea what was happening or why. These men that were in the cabin, I knew that they had been there for a while. There was food eaten. There was Christmas presents open. It wasn't just that we walked in and startled them or scared them. They had actually waited for our family to return home. Their plan was to destroy their evidence and burn it to the ground. There was always gas cans full of gas for the snowmobiles.
They immediately got busy doing things.
They poured gas everywhere and set the cabin on fire. I can remember hearing the smoke alarms going off as the fire was already ablazing inside the cabin.
There was a sense of urgency. They began telling us, we gotta hurry and load the snowmobiles and get out of here. I had this feeling inside of me that we needed to listen and do what they said until the moment came to where Linnea and I could make our escape.
My sister and I drove these awful men on the snowmobiles out of the cabin. I drove one man behind me, and my sister drove the other man behind her.
I had all kinds of different plans of how to wreck the snowmobile, how to throw him off into a tree, how to get rid of him. But all I could think of is I couldn't leave my sister.
I can remember wanting to stay close enough that I could still see my sister. I felt a sense of security, knowing that she was still there.
There was no one to help us. There was nowhere to go. We're in the middle of the mountains, on snowmobiles.
We headed up to the main gate and saw my Uncle Randy.
I seen the snowmobiles come up the trail, 2 snowmobiles, and I go, oh, look, there's my nieces. I knew it was the girls with 2 people on the back. And I go, wow, they got boyfriends. I walked over there and tried to greet them and say hi. And I waved my hands in there, and they just drove by me. And I go, that's weird. That's not my nieces. They don't do that to me.
I saw my uncle. Uncle had pulled up and he waved at us, and we just kind of looked at him and turned back. And the men said, who was that? Somebody that must live up here, just being nice. I knew his life could be in danger. I knew if these men knew Randy was our uncle there, that they would have killed him. We were up there in the mountains. There was no one around. It was just my sister and I and 2 men that were dangerous that had a gun. There was a feeling of being completely vulnerable. Once we arrived at the family car, they had 2 guns. Each of them had a gun, and the dark-headed man loaded his gun in the trunk. And as he loaded his gun in the trunk, he pulled his jacket open and he had a knife. And he looked at me and goes, don't worry, I'm just as good with a knife as I am a gun.
And then I seen the Lincoln come out across the street. And I go, well, there they are again. I was walking up to the car as they were pulling out, and I was actually looking in the back, and I think I seen Linnea in the back. I waved my hands again. I go, stop.
I knew that if we were to call out or plead for help or act like we knew Randy, that Randy would be shot as well. So he was waving his arms, and my sister and I just pretended we didn't know who he was.
The car just drove right by me. I knew something's wrong. I don't think it was a minute. I seen another snowmobile come up with this person on it, and I look, I go, well, he's no coat on, and, no gloves, no helmet, and I go, wow, who is this? And I look, and I go, oh my God, it's my brother, Rolf. And his face is just huge and full of blood, and just big. His eyes swelled shut, blood sickles, because it was cold. He was in really bad shape, and he says, I've been shot, my wife has been killed, and my daughters have been kidnapped. I start heading down the canyon as fast as I could. I'm in panic. Rolf's in the back, full of blood, laying on the back seat. 20 years ago, your cell service did not work up there whatsoever in that canyon. And I kept trying and trying and trying. There are two things on my mind. Save the girls, get him onto life flight. I come up to the back of the Lincoln. I know the girls are kidnapped. I know the guys got guns in the car there. I'm going, what do I do? Do I run him off the road? Still trying to call out on the mobile. And my mobile kicked in. I got 911. And she says, tell me what direction they're going. We got police, we got people in the area. I go, well, they're turning on the road. They're heading towards Camas. I go, I need a helicopter, and the phone went dead. I pulled in the gas station, went over to the payphone, and got 911 back on the phone again. And I go, guys, I need a helicopter now.
We noticed a cop car pass us and turn around and begin to follow us. Both men began to panic. I remember looking over, the speedometer was going over 90 miles an hour.
We turned right down towards a canyon and went another mile or so and then fell. The car fell off an embankment.
I remember looking up because the car was at an angle and noticing the entire road above us we came down was full of maybe a couple cops, but mostly people in common clothes, drawn down with pistols and shotguns and rifles at us. And I just remember how amazed I was that there were so many people there so fast.
There was cops pointing guns at me, and my little sister says, no, that's my sister. And I don't think they'd received information that there was even hostages in the car.
I reached back for my sister's hand and grabbed her hand and said, duck.
And we both ducked, and we were praying and just squeezing each other's hand. We've always had a connection, even as little children, a special connection where we can feel each other. She's always been a great comfort to me.
The suspects were taken from the vehicle and then were secured by officers who'd arrived at the scene. These guys are obviously cowards. As long as they were in total control of a situation by use of fear and force, then they continued to function. When that control went away, that's when it stopped, and they surrendered to authorities.
The men were down on their knees with their arms behind their neck, and the cops were, yelling at them to get down and surrender. And I started to yell at the cops to kill him. I said, kill him. They just killed my mom, my dad, and my gramps. Kill him. Shoot him now. Kill him.
I remember a feeling of not necessarily being safe, but have survived. We're no longer in the custody of those two evil men.
The helicopter showed up. They got Rolf out of the back of my Blazer and got him into care, and he was in pretty bad shape, critical condition. And when it lifted off, I'm just praying that he makes it.
I can't imagine what had to have been going through Dad's head after he'd been shot and then shot again. And he's laying there, playing dead, trying to breathe as shallow as possible. I later learned that Dad had actually been doused with gasoline, and he caught on fire himself, and he had to run into the shower and tear off his snowsuit while on fire. Having the strength to get on the snowmobile and race down that mountain to save my sister and I, how much blood he'd lost, how he couldn't see, getting down the mountain in freezing temperatures. My whole life, my dad was my hero, and that just put an exclamation point on that.
My dad was the most amazing hero that I've ever known. Beautiful, kind blue eyes. He was extremely kind and generous in every way.
The number one concern in this particular case is rescuing anybody who might need assistance. Secondly is to preserve the evidence at the crime scene. One of the most significant pieces of evidence was a video camera Inside the video camera was a videotape. We had no idea what might be recorded on that. So at a number of junctures in that film, I was saying, "Oh my God, oh my God."
Hundreds of crime scenes later, it still ranks right up there. You know, it's still very vivid to me. Probably when I got about maybe 10 feet from the door, I picked up a faint smell. It was kind of like burnt hair and maybe burnt fabric, like clothes burning. As I entered the garage, there was maybe a 12 to 18 inch puddle of blood that was fresh. As I started up the stairwell, I could see holes in the wall, bullet holes coming from one wall across the stairwell into the other wall. There was a blood smear on the wall. It looked like a bloody hand had wiped down the wall. And it almost looked like a mini war zone. There was 2 bodies. I checked for a pulse, but I knew in my mind they was deceased. I actually walked into the smoke before I really realized that the top floor of that cabin was on fire. Then our mindset went to protecting the victim's property because we thought the cabin was going to burn down. On top of the coffee table, there was a VCR camera and some tapes.
There was a double funeral for my mother and grandmother. My grandmother's name's Beth Tidwell Potts. My mother's name is Kay Tidwell Tita. I remember just so many people and families that came to love us and help us feel their love and support.
Aunt Claudia was my mom's older sister. When Mom passed, Aunt Claudia stepped in, letting us know that she was there, and it gave us all a sense of that we weren't alone.
I wanted to be there as much as I possibly could because they needed support. This was a horribly traumatizing thing for them, and we were what they had left.
Gramps had a lot of energy. She was full of life.
She was a very fun, vivacious, energetic, happy grandma. She would give me permanents in my hair and make it curly, awful. I remember Mom called the aspen trees quakies. She loved the noise that the quaking aspen made in the wind. That was one of her fondest memories, and it is mine as well.
My sister was one of the most devoted mothers that I have ever known. She would give up anything for her children. She was strong-willed and they were strong-willed, and you know, that relationship was not without conflict, but they always worked it out.
The morning of the crime, I remember turning and walking over to give my mother a hug, as I always did. And she and I had gotten a little argument earlier that morning over something silly. And she and I both looked at each other, and me at 16 years old just turned and wasn't going to give her a hug. And I turned and walked the other way. And that's the last time I saw my mom alive.
You tell me what's your justification for taking these lives and doing this to these people that you don't even know. When I watched the videotape that had been taken from the crime scene, I expected to see pictures of family talking, playing games, doing what family folks do. But as it turns out, there were the two suspects.
I don't know.
They were opening the family's Christmas presents.
What is it?
I remember thinking of the pure malice and hate that these men must have. What heartless jerks. Why would you do this to our family?
The two men were in their early to mid-20s. Both spent time at Utah State Penitentiary. Vaughn Taylor had been previously convicted of an aggravated burglary. What I gather is he was a normal kid, a very normal and decent family, but that at some point he got into some conflict with the law.
I don't think I got all of this.
I'm not aware of a violent history on Mr. Edward Delly. He had been convicted of an arson. They'd been released from the penitentiary to a halfway house facility. So apparently they were given the ability to go out and look for employment. At that point, they just absconded.
I later learned that these men had hitchhiked their way up there and chose that area because one of the men had family that had a cabin in the area. They'd robbed several cabins and eventually came to our cabin because they knew we were there. They wanted to find a way to get a vehicle and get out of the country. And they waited for us all night long to return.
I'm afraid to go in there and get
This might appear to be a slam dunk case to some folks, but from an investigator's point of view, it was very complicated and very complex. Sure, it's not a whodunit. There's no question who committed the crimes, but being able to determine what criminal act each suspect committed, that was a challenge.
Vaughn Taylor and Ed Delly very much each took their own separate part in murdering my mom and Grams. I do not feel one man in any way, shape, or form was more responsible.
They were charged with the murders, the aggravated kidnapping, the arsons, the high-speed chase. I don't remember the exact number, but in addition to the murders, there were something like 8 to 10 felonies and some misdemeanors.
I wanted them both to be sentenced to the death penalty. I wanted both of them to know that they were going to die.
Approximately 5 months after these crimes, Vaughn Taylor pleaded guilty to 2 counts of capital murder, and the state dropped all of the other charges against him in exchange for that plea.
I believe Taylor pled guilty to his crime because there was so much cold evidence against him that that was all that he could plead, was guilty.
Taylor was an evil man. He had no remorse, no regard for life whatsoever. You could see it in his eyes. You could see it in his countenance. From the moment we saw him to the last time we saw him in court, he just had this air about him of anger and zero remorse.
Taylor opted to go to sentencing in front of a jury instead of in front of a judge. The jury sentenced him to a death sentence for both murders. So he has 2 death sentences.
I felt relieved that Taylor would be put to death for his crime. Justice had been served.
Short period of time after that, a couple of weeks, I believe, and Mr. Delly went to trial. We were as prepared, if not maybe even a little bit more prepared, to go into the Delly trial as we were with the Vaughn Taylor trial.
I felt a great burden. I felt like they practically wanted me to be able to see the bullets coming out of the guns, that they expected me to point the exact gun in the direction of every bullet and where it hit at any given moment. I actually just had a whole epiphany of new thoughts come to that I don't think that was helpful for a victim to have to put a weapon that they watched their family murdered with, to even have to touch it. What is the point? The weapons were already on the table. Why would I have to touch it?
Those trials are somewhat of a blur to me. I was 16 years old, and I wanted to go back and live that life I loved and not having to keep relive a nightmare. Deli's lawyer argued that he didn't do any of the shooting. These men were guilty. They committed a crime. They needed to be punished, and we needed to move on.
Lene and Trish Tata were excellent witnesses. They were very sure about the things they had seen, and very articulate, able to relate these very, very sensational things in an unemotional way. So they were extremely valuable witnesses. But we had another survivor of the case. Mr. Tita survived the assault and the attack. Incredible guy.
I remember sitting and watching the look on Deli's face as he came in seeing my father, and it was very apparent to me that he did not know my father had survived. And the look on his face was just priceless. Like he had been defeated. My dad survived. We won.
He's lucky that they used the wrong gun when they shot him. They used birdshot. Very ineffective. They didn't know that. You know, I think his odds of having made it and survived an incident like that are probably 1 in 1,000. He was kind of an ace in the hole, and he brought the prosecution together in an outstanding way. I expected Edward Deli to be convicted of first-degree murder. The case had been thoroughly investigated, and the prosecutor's office had done an excellent job.
I heard the verdict came out, second-degree murder with life imprisonment, and I never really understood that. I said, something's wrong. It can only be them that did this. How can he be not sentenced to death?
Deli was not convicted of first-degree murder. He was convicted of second-degree murder, and a death sentence was no longer an option once that conviction came in.
Edward Deli received second-degree murder instead of first-degree due to one jury member deciding to hold out. I felt like the courts did an injustice to our family. I felt like that he deserved to be on death row as well, just like Taylor. Deli murdered, Taylor murdered.
This was such a horrific experience for everybody here that I think we all didn't know what to say or buried it inside to where we didn't talk about this a lot.
I went through periods of anger and frustration and not understanding why. And for years and years that follow, I'd cry in silence. I spent a good 10 years hiding that pain and suppressing that pain.
I went through trying to find happiness in areas where happiness doesn't exist. I went through fear of putting my heart out there, fear of loving someone or letting someone love me, that they would abandon me. I believe it was 2001 I received a letter from Deli. I thought about it for many years and would go to write him a letter, and it just never felt right. It took me over 9 years to respond to Deli's letter. I held on to the letter and I reread it probably 20, 30 times. I was just very careful and guarded with my feelings. I basically wanted to get a feel if he was truly sorry. Deli has shared with me that he has grown into a man, not the same evil boy that committed the crime. I believe that I gained my freedom back for myself by choosing to forgive Deli. For me, forgiving does not mean forgetting. I do not believe Edward Deli has a place outside of prison. But when I came to the place of forgiveness, I felt a tremendous burden, relief off my shoulders. I felt free.
Lene is flawed perfection. Lene and I have been married a little over 3 years now. She's my best friend. She's everything to me. There is something in her eyes that is just, it's like pure. And she's as flawed as the rest of us, but she has this innocence that still is there that I just love.
Nathan changed my life by opening his heart and sharing his true self and giving me the freedom to do the same. I have 4 kids and 5 beautiful stepkids. And I just feel like it's a beautiful start of a new beginning. For me to be a survivor has become a beautiful gift. I believe that I can share it with others. After the cabin had burned, we went and rebuilt it and made it even better than it was before. I can remember my dad. He would say this to me quite often. He would say, Lene, I know lightning strikes. He says, but lightning never strikes twice in the same location. And I would find great peace in that. Sometimes, if I ever would have fear, I would just hear my dad say, Lene, you're going to be safe.
It's fabulous. We love it there. We need to do a hike before I go down. We actually go up there and enjoy family and friends. We play and we relax. We bond. They're not going to take away from us the things that we love and we enjoy in our life. They took our mom, they took our grams, but that's where it ends.
The cabin's magical. The cabin is healing.
When my father was diagnosed with cancer, our whole family came together, and that last 6 to 8 weeks of his life were so absolutely incredible.
He pulled me aside, spent about an hour and a half with me, just me and him. And probably gave me one of the greatest compliments I had in my life. And I'm still just a touch uneasy about it. That he knew Lene would be okay, and that he could go, because he knew I would take care of her.
When my father passed, it was very peaceful. I had the privilege of being right by his side as he took his last breaths, and his spirit has never left me. Anytime I need my dad, he's there. He comes in some of the most unique and special times. I very much still feel that my father is there. I have 2 beautiful little girls, and when I look into their eyes, I see both my mother and my father and everything that's loving and pure. I have an awesome life. I love my life now, and I wouldn't say that the incident in 1990 defines me, but I would say it's helped make me who I am today.
Can you hear the wind blowing through the trees? Can you hear the wind when it's talking to the leaves?
I think my sister would be absolutely delighted if she looked down to see the healing that Lene and Tricia have gone through and what they've done with their lives.
Let the wind blow, whoa, whoa, let the wind, let it tell you where to go.
I feel very much so that this experience has changed me as a person. I choose that it's a part of who I am. It's my life story.
Because there's always demons behind every door. And if you let the wind blow, then the demons ain't there no more. Just let the wind.
What we experienced together, that created a bond that obviously I couldn't have with anybody else. And I'm glad that we were there together.
killed my brother.
Did you kill David Jackson?
Oh, hell no. But after hours of interrogation, Wolf made a bizarre statement. He told investigators Harry, Barbara's dad, hated David and wanted him dead, and had turned to Wolf, the former military police officer, for advice.
Harry and I had discussed this. David's demise. I told him what type of weapon to use.
What type of weapon was that?
It was a .22 caliber. I told him it had to be headshot.
Shouldn't have. When did you have this discussion with Harry?
Oh my God, it was probably 3-4 months before it disappeared.
Wolf continued to deny any further involvement, but Detective Velasquez wasn't done digging. She learned that Wolf had sold a gun to one of his ex-wives, Nancy Graham.
And I placed a phone call to her.
It was a shock.
I told her I was a detective for the Pembroke Pines Police Department working in the homicide investigation of David Jackson. And did she know who David Jackson was?
She started asking me questions, and it just freaked me out. It just shocked me.
Nancy immediately knew her ex-husband, Michael Wolf, was in trouble.
She says, how much evidence do you have against him? Wow. I kind of bluffed her, and I said, I have enough to put him away right now. She goes, I need to call you back.
I didn't know what to do or what to say.
For years, she held a secret.
It's the worst thing I've ever done in my life.
Nancy knew the truth of what really happened to David Jackson.
Just going over it makes me feel like such a for not saying something earlier.
A court-ordered ankle bracelet that tracked her every move and reminded her of David's death. Judy wears a bracelet of her own, but one she treasures and she never wants to take off. It holds David's ashes.
They're in both ends, some of the ashes, and then I have our birthstones on each end. He gives me strength. That brings me.
I think it was really extremely shocking. You just don't expect something like that to happen here.
The murder of 53-year-old Carol Kennedy had a devastating impact on her friend and neighbor, Jan Wheeler.
I didn't know anything about it until the next morning, and there was the yellow tape across. So I stopped, and I said, hey, my good friend lives there. Is everything okay? And they said, no, it's not. And they said she's dead.
Carol had been a teacher and a therapist, working with addicts at a local women's clinic. But she was mostly known around town as an artist, a printmaker.
Printmaking is a fine art form that brings the disciplines of drawing, painting, graphic arts, all into one arena.
She spent hours in this studio working alongside fellow artists like Barb Wills.
To me, her artwork gave her her voice. Nobody was judging her. Nobody was hurting her.
The bitterness of her divorce with Steve could be clearly seen in her work, according to another friend, Betsy Pettit.
And I think for her, it definitely showed, especially the colors. They were much darker, much moodier.
He was a fun-loving person. He wanted to have fun, and he wanted to be around town.
Steve is the oldest of 9 children.
He taught me how to canoe and swim and ride a bike, and he was just the best big brother you could ask for.
He's a very gentle, non-violent guy.
Which is why his family was so shocked when police claimed they had a strong circumstantial case and arrested him in October of 2008, 3 months after Carol's murder.
Carol Kennedy's body was discovered laying in a pool of her own blood.
At DeMocker's trial, the horror of the crime was hard for some to reconcile, with a successful stockbroker sitting at the defense table.
When I met him, he was clearly in shock, clearly was trying to hold his family together.
Rich Robertson is an investigator for DeMocker's defense team. Robertson walked us through Carol's home.
So what do we know about Carol's activity that night? What was she doing?
When Carol got off work, probably about 5:30 in the afternoon, she went to the store, bought some salad, came home, and went for a run.
Robertson saw the gruesome crime scene within days of the murder.
It was clearly a violent crime scene. Just the blood spatter on the wall, on the desk. It was just all over. I mean, it was all the way to the other wall.
How do you have this much blood and there's no bloody footprint, no bloody fingerprints or handprints anywhere?
Right.
I mean, it's like a ghost came in.
Right.
Defense lawyer Larry Hammond insists there was no record of any violence throughout the DeMockers' marriage.
Someone might say, well, a great theme here is that this was a very contentious divorce, which causes most of us to think, well, it must have been violent. There must have been threats. There must have been protective orders.
And was there any of that?
No.
Was there ever any
not at all.
threat of violence anywhere?
No.
I never saw him act violently. He's very controlled.
Even DeMocker's girlfriend at the time of the murder, Renee Girard, says that he often spoke fondly of his ex-wife.
He shared a lot about his marriage, and he shared it in many stories that were heartwarming and joyful, and as something he regretted losing.
But Carol's friend Jan says, in truth, Steve was angry about the divorce.
Oh, he was furious. He was absolutely furious that she would have the nerve to do anything against him because she never had.
But clearly, Carol had finally had enough. Enough of a husband who, by all accounts, had become a serial philanderer.
Towards the end, she was like, I think I've counted 17 affairs he's had. The first one that she was aware of was her midwife and he were sleeping together while she was pregnant.
And so why would she stay with him then?
She loved him. He's just very charming. He will tell a woman exactly what she wants to hear.
He could be a bad guy from a morality standpoint, if you will, but that doesn't reflect a motive to kill Carol.
Do you think you can make Stephen look like a likable guy to the jury?
What you may think about him as a good guy or a bad guy have nothing to do with this case.
Caught in the middle are the couple's 2 daughters who are called to testify. They have lost a mother, but believe in their father's innocence.
It was the first time the full family had been together in a while, and it was after the divorce had been finalized, and it was actually very pleasant.
Katie tells the court about the last time she saw her mother, as the family gathered at the airport to see her off on a trip abroad 4 days before the murder.
It was very emotional. There was just nothing but expressions of love and gratitude and happiness. And I looked back and my dad had his arm around my mom and my mom had her arm around my sister and they were all waving to me. So that was the last memory I have of my mother.
And Charlotte talked about the last text she and her mother exchanged on the day her mother died.
I had just gotten a new job and she was asking me how my training was.
Do you remember what the last text message you got back from your mother was?
I do. I love you in all capitals.
Have they been supportive of Stephen?
Oh, incredibly supportive. Unanimously supportive.
Over the last 23 months since your mother died, has your relationship with your father changed in any particular way?
It's difficult to stay as close when you can't hug your dad, but we've remained as close as possible.
The jury would have to decide if the man described as a loving father could have killed the mother of his children. Defense attorney John Sears tells the court the state has no case.
It's always the husband. If it's not him, who else is it? They jump to that conclusion.
Is there any physical evidence, DNA, blood, hair fibers, anything that matches Stephen DeMocker?
There's no DNA of Steve DeMocker anywhere in that house.
But there is DNA under Carol's fingernails that belongs to someone else, a man whose identity remains a mystery.
If he was the attacker, should have been his DNA, and it was not.
Still, Joe Butner of the Yavapai County Attorney's Office is emphatic that DeMocker was the only one who had the means, the motive, and the opportunity to kill Carol.
The evidence will show that while Mr. DeMocker was on his bike ride, his cell phone was off.
By the way, his phone is dead. Battery's dead.
okay? All of a sudden, he's out of the grid. Most people say you go out of the grid. There's a reason why you're out of the grid.
Within miles of the serene beauty of the Arizona Red Rocks, Carol Kennedy's life had come to a violent end. From the moment Steve DeMacher was charged with his ex-wife's murder, his family not only felt a profound loss.
It's like, okay, we lost Carol, now we lost Steve.
His parents also lived with the fear of having their son put to death.
I kept going over the moment, and I could picture a clock at 11:45, and 10 of 12, and 5 of 12. Counting down, knowing now he's going down the corridor. Now they're putting him on a gurney. Now they're starting an IV that will pour poison into his system. And that was what I went to sleep with at night.
The death penalty was taken off the table before the trial began, but Steve DeMacher still faced life in prison. Adding to his family's pain was their belief that authorities missed a key suspect, Jim Knapp. Knapp was a friend of Carol's who was living at her guest house.
It was an ugly divorce.
Knapp was quick to arrive at the crime scene, and investigators recorded their conversation with him as he pointed a finger directly at Steve DeMacher.
My intuitive take, that comes off to me as a very sneaky, manipulative man.
And the first thing he said is, you know, she's got this crazy ex-husband, and I have a feeling it was probably him.
Jim Knapp might have had a reason to disparage Steve. Sharon DeMacher says there was a rumor around town that Jim Knapp wanted to be more than just friends with Carol.
What concerned us was that he was very enamored of Carol.
That's why DeMacher's defense team wants to know why investigators didn't take Knapp in for questioning or search his residence.
He wasn't looked at all that night. They never looked at his clothing. They never really inspected his truck.
Authorities had a good reason not to suspect Jim Knapp. Unlike Steve DeMacher, Knapp had an alibi.
They realized that Knapp's alibi was he was babysitting his son at his former wife's house.
But even if investigators had wanted to question Knapp again, they wouldn't get the chance. In a bizarre twist, Knapp was found dead 5 months after Carol's murder. His death was ruled a suicide.
Some people would say because Knapp committed suicide that it was a conscience of guilt in reference to his participation in being the murderer of Carol. Unfortunately, he's not alive. We can't ask him that question.
2 weeks into the prosecution's case, there is a stunning development. Steve DeMacher's trial comes to an abrupt halt when Judge Thomas B. Limber collapses in his chambers from a brain tumor. During the delay, DeMacher's girlfriend, Renee Girard, has a surprising change of heart and ends their 2-year relationship.
You know, I always wanted to believe that Steve had nothing to do with this. And I always felt conflicted about that, about whether he had done it or not.
Girard is having second thoughts about her boyfriend's behavior on the night of Carol's murder.
His break with routine, being out without a charged battery for his phone, being out without a flat tire kit to change his tire when he was the master of preparation for any outdoor adventure.
Thanks to new information from Renee, investigators literally unearth a crucial piece of evidence. What they say is a go bag stashed in a field outside Steve's house. Renee says he had packed it just in case he had a chance to make a run for it.
He was very constantly gripped with fear of being arrested. He was obsessed with plans to flee, saying, I'm afraid I'm going to be arrested for a crime I didn't commit.
And then came more damaging information from Renee. Remember what DeMacher's attorney told us? Was there a life insurance policy involved that he would have benefited from?
There also was a life insurance policy that he had no interest in and hasn't benefited from.
Well, not exactly. Renee told investigators that was a lie. Even though Steve DeMacher, charged with Carol's murder, could not directly receive the $750,000, he gave instructions to his daughters to transfer all of it to his defense attorneys.
Everybody along the way said, yes, it's okay to release this money to the girls.
years and 1 mistrial later, Steve DeMacher remains behind bars, more than ready for his new day in court.
And he's kept a good attitude. He's kept hope.
With the new trial comes a new defense attorney, court-appointed Craig Williams.
They cannot put him in the house. And I felt good about that because I firmly believe he didn't kill her. And I felt that a reasonable jury would say, well, you can't put him in the house with this much blood?
For years, there was forensic evidence that seemed to strongly suggest there might be another suspect in the murder of Carol Kennedy. Remember that mystery DNA found under her fingernails? By the time the second trial begins, the state has finally determined it belongs to 68-year-old Ronald Berman. But how are Berman and Carol connected? Berman's autopsy was performed on the same day, on the same table as Carol's.
The DNA under Carol's fingernails belonged to the person who they did an autopsy on an hour and a half before Carol's autopsy.
Are you kidding? Did they not wipe the table down afterwards? This is a homicide investigation.
The defense claims Carol's real killer may never be found because the crime scene was so badly compromised.
There's a photograph of the deputies standing down the hall, and the dog is right there with them. They tromped through that crime scene without any care about what they're preserving. Why didn't they seal that whole thing off?
With no physical evidence to convict or exonerate Steve DeMacher,
that's what happens when you run out of money.
The prosecution points to his alleged motive: money. Emails between the former couple show they were still arguing over money, despite defense claims that the divorce had been settled.
Email on June 15th. I will not be pushed any further, Carol. You have extracted all you will extract from me. You get to start clean while I dig out of a staggering hole.
Carol's friend Jan Wheeler believes Steve was trying to solve his money problems by manipulating his ex-wife.
He would play these reeling in games with her. One of the very last conversations I had with Carol, she was just absolutely in tears. I mean, just sobbing. I was like, Carol, now what? And she said, now that the divorce is final, he has come to me last night and said, let's put this marriage back together.
And he just wouldn't go away.
Wouldn't go away.
Everyone is present. You may clear next witness.
Barb, hold on.
Steve's attempts to insert himself back into Carol's life seem to be confirmed by yet another woman, his longtime business partner and lover, Barbara Onan. Onan testified that she spent the night with Steve in a Phoenix hotel room just 5 days before Carol's murder.
He was texting with Carol because Katie was flying out to Africa that day, and they were going to spend the day shopping.
That was news to you?
That was news to me. I felt as though I had been had one more time, been fooled one more time, that there they were, still back together.
It seemed like the theme of the second case was to dirty up Steve enough that jurors would believe that he could have killed her. They had to bring all of these things in that made him look like a bad guy.
He kind of was a bad guy, though.
But again, none of that. There's no violence in his history.
In the court of public opinion, people say, you know, he cheated on her an awful lot, and that speaks to their moral character. What do you have to say in response to that?
I guess all I can say is if every spouse who cheated wound up accused of murder, we'd have a problem. I regret the mistakes I made during my marriage, and it has nothing to do with any capacity for murder.
Did you ever see any violence?
As she testifies at this second trial, daughter Charlotte suggests her mother was the one with the temper.
And did you ever see anybody throwing anything or doing anything like that?
I very vaguely remember my mom actually throwing something at him. I don't recall what it was. I think it was something heavy, but that was the only argument that there was ever anything physical.
DeMacher's attorneys insist that Carol's tenant, Jim Knapp, could be the killer, that he is the one with a history of intimidating women. An ex-girlfriend of Knapp's, Julie Corwin, testifies that she became afraid of Knapp after their breakup.
The last words in one of his emails was, quote unquote, "You're not getting off that easy." It just left me hanging. I felt scared. I didn't know if he was going to come up and shoot me.
The evidence is way, way, way stronger against Jim Knapp than it is against Steve DeMacher. This is a left-handed club.
Finally, after After nearly $2 million spent in taxpayers' money, the jury is about to get the case.
That's what happened to Carol. Her skull was shattered like an eggshell. This is a beating murder by someone who had everything in the world to gain by getting rid of her.
Absence of evidence is not evidence. If you cannot put him at the scene, if you cannot make sure that you have DNA, blood, hair, something to tie Mr. DeMacher to the murder of Carol Kennedy, you got no case.
I know I wasn't at her house that night, and I'm innocent.
We'll keep fighting.
We'll keep fighting.
To this day, Steve DeMacher says he is baffled at how he could be accused, let alone convicted, of killing his ex-wife.
If you did not kill her, sir, then why do you think you are in jail right now?
That's the million-dollar question. It was so difficult to imagine that 12 people could look at that evidence and come up with a verdict beyond a reasonable doubt.
The pieces of evidence that started to sway me was definitely the shoe prints, because that type of shoe was very rare. His phone was turned off, was very unusual for him. The scratches concerned me.
We heard about the internet searches that he had done on how to make a homicide look like a suicide.
Nowhere in the testimony did we see anything that would convince us that he was trying to write a book.
And if pointing the finger at Jim Knapp was supposed to raise reasonable doubt with the jurors,
I didn't know if he was going to come up and shoot me.
It didn't work.
We went through Mr. Knapp's timeline carefully, and we just could not make that work. Mr. Knapp did not kill Carol Kennedy.
On January 24th, 2014, Steve DeMacher is back in court for sentencing. The business suit is gone. This time, he's wearing the chains of a convicted killer.
If you want us to abandon Steve, you need to show us a drop of DNA in that house, a drop of Carol's blood anywhere on his body, his bike, his car, his home, a witness, a video, something, before we'll even begin to think that this is anything less than the conviction of an innocent man.
Steve DeMacher addresses the court for the first time and refuses to accept the jury's verdict.
I did not kill Carol. We loved each other for more than 20 years, and to believe me capable of violence against her, I would no more have harmed her than I would harm my daughters by taking her from them. I'd like to thank my family, and I'd like my daughters in particular to know how proud I am of the strength and the grace with which they have faced both the loss of their mother and the loss of their father. I love you both.
The girls' love for their father is evident when they beg the judge for mercy.
So much of what I strongly value in myself, I learned from that man. This is the same man who sits here today accused of killing my mother. Frankly, the lack of facts and the lack of evidence in this case do not permit me the luxury of drawing such conclusions. You are faced with the question of whether or not to give my father the possibility of parole in 25 years. And I ask you that you do.
I ask that you not force the permanent loss of a second loved one, but rather allow us to look forward to a time when our pain may slightly diminish and when we may heal together again.
But the prosecutor will have none of it.
This defendant is a murdering, lying thief. No matter what anybody else is going to say about him here today, he deserves the maximum sentence.
As the judge announces the sentence, he has some harsh words for DeMacher.
The thing that I can't get by is this horrific crime scene. I saw these pictures, and I'm not sure I'm ever going to be able to erase those pictures from my mind. It was brutal murder, and from all appearances, the motive was money. The sentence I'm going to impose is natural life in prison.
Steve DeMacher will spend the rest of his life in prison with no chance of parole. For his two daughters, it is a double tragedy.
They've lost a lot, and they have just shown so much strength and grace through all of this, and they will do well just because of who they are.
As for me, I can promise that I will never forget the memory of my mother. She lives.
Rogan? Holmes, you're Donna E. Holmes. Alamos, Somas, Alamos, Isa, Isa, Alamos, Oklahoma, Isa, Yuri, Iwatani, Oklahoma, Homas, Donna, Oklahoma, Homas, Donna, Oklahoma, Lore, Yuri, Oklahoma, Iwatani, Iwrodi, Lore, Habadakis, Redkid, Red Habadakis, Red Habadakis, Isa, Homas, Oklahoma, Homas, Redkid, Habadakis, Red Oklahoma, Homas, Redkid, Redkid, Habadakis, Homas, Habadakis, Oklahoma, Homas, Habadakis, Habadakis, Yuri, Rogan, Homas, Oklahoma, Donna, Yuri, Lore, Habadakis, Redkid, Rogan, Donna, Alamos, Lore, Habadakis, Homas, Alamos, Habadakis, Homas, Habadakis, Oklahoma, Redkid, Habadakis, Yuri, Oklahoma, Homas, Rogan, Alamos, Evil, Alamos, Yes. Yes. Alamos. Homas. Alamos. Zokonta. Zokonta. Homas. Zokonta. Donna E. Zokonta. Homas. Donna Oklahoma. Zokonta. Alamos. Homas. Alamos. Donna Zokonta. Homas. Rogan? Lore? Oklahoma? Rogan? Donna, Oklahoma? Donna, Donna E. Rogan? Donna, Oklahoma? Donna, Oklahoma? Rogan? Donna, Human.